At least 300 supporters of Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro are arrested after demonstrators stormed Brazilia's Congress and Supreme Court. Kiev denies Russian claims that it killed 600 Ukrainian troops in strikes on military barracks in Kramatorsk.
Rallies in Europe after Iran executes 2 more men arrested in its crackdown on protesters.
A tense standoff between Brazil's security forces and far-right protesters. At least 300 supporters of Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro were arrested after demonstrators stormed Brazilia's Congress and Supreme Court buildings on Sunday. Brazil's current president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said police were too slow to act when the crowds turned violent. He said they invaded the government buildings and broke many things, and sadly the military police did not do enough. There was, I would say, incompetence, bad will or bad faith of the people who take care of public security. It's not the first time, he said. You will see in the images that the military police are leading protesters towards Three Powers Plaza. Bolsonaro supporters said they were demonstrating peacefully and claim Lula's election was undemocratic.
The people breaking things inside Congress are infiltrators.
Jair Bolsonaro, who's currently in the US, gave a muted response to the unrest, saying on Twitter that vandalism and invasions are unlawful. The attack has received condemnation from world leaders, including President of the European Council Charles Michel, who called the incident an assault on Brazil's democratic institutions. Words echoed by UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres and US President Joe Biden. Mexico's president reaffirmed his support for Lula. Destroyed furniture, smashed glass and graffiti. Lula arrived in Brasilia on Sunday night to inspect the damage, shades of the January the 6th invasion of the US Capitol buildings by supporters of then-President Donald Trump. Russian forces say they have killed around 600 Ukrainian troops in strikes on military barracks in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, but Kiev has denied the claims. And residents in Kramatorsk say it's very unlikely that Russian strikes have caused as much damage as Moscow suggests. This resident has been living in Kramatorsk for 9 months. He doesn't believe Russia's claims, saying he hasn't seen any military here. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Sunday that the world has seen again that Russia lies, as fighting on the front line continued despite a unilateral truce called by President Putin for Orthodox Christmas. The situation on the front line has not changed significantly in the first week of the year, he says. Heavy fighting continues in Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Every hotspot in these areas is well known. Bakhmut is holding on despite everything. Almost all of the city is destroyed by Russian strikes. Our soldiers repel constant attempts of Russian offensives there. Solidar is holding on, though there is even more destruction. Meanwhile, a Russian mayor has released video footage allegedly showing training exercises at the Wagner PMC training camp, claiming the Russian paramilitary group were preparing his residents for deployment in Ukraine.
Bosnian Serb separatist leader Milorad Dodik has awarded Russian President Vladimir Putin the highest Medal of Honor for his patriotic concern and love for the Serb-controlled half of Bosnia. Dodik has maintained close ties with the Russian president despite Russia's war in Ukraine. The medal will be presented to Putin during the next meeting between the two leaders.
In London, thousands rallied to show support for unprecedented protests in Iran in recent months, sparked by the death of a young woman, Mahsa Amini, in police custody in September. They also marked the 3rd anniversary of Iran's downing of a Ukrainian airliner near Tehran. In Lyon, France, more protests the day after the Iranian regime hanged 2 protesters, both called Mohammed.
We've had many Mohammeds during these demonstrations, many Mohammeds who are victims of this regime. In fact, Mohammed was just 22 years old, and yesterday He was hanged after 11 weeks of hunger strike.
In Iran itself, there was another protest, this time targeting the French embassy in Tehran. They were showing their anger at caricatures of Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, published in the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. Iran's described the cartoons as insulting and indecent.
As Pakistan struggles to cope with the impact of last summer's devastating floods, international donors have pledged billions in aid at a UN conference in Geneva. The catastrophe, which experts link to climate change, killed more than 1,700 people and displaced some 8 million others.
Excellencies, we must match the heroic response of the people of Pakistan with our own efforts and massive investments to strengthen their communities for the future. Rebuilding Pakistan in a resilient way will run in excess of $16 billion, and far more will be needed in the longer term.
Pakistan hopes that about half of the required amount will come from the international community. French President Emmanuel Macron said his country was ready to play its part.
In Pakistan, we have therefore decided to mobilize a total of €360 million for projects which will be launched to address the challenge of resilience reconstruction and climate adaptation.
The conference is being seen to test the willingness of wealthier countries to help poorer nations deal with the impact of climate-related disasters, a commitment that was agreed upon at the recent COP27 summit in Egypt. A journey to calm fears of a migrant crisis in the United States. President Joe Biden visited the US-Mexico border on his first trip to the region after 2 years in office, and as record numbers of migrants are crossing into the country. The president met with immigration staff in El Paso and observed how officers search vehicles for drugs and money. Biden spent just a few hours in the city for a visit that seemingly aimed to showcase a smooth and humane migrant processing system. But under new rules enacted by the US government, illegal migrants from 4 countries are now subject to quick expulsion. Critics have accused Biden of taking a hard line on immigration, akin to that of his predecessor Donald Trump. From El Paso, Biden travelled south to Mexico City, where he and the leaders of Mexico and Canada will meet today and tomorrow for a North American Leaders Summit, where unsurprisingly immigration is firmly on the agenda.
A jumbo jet called Cosmic Girl with a rocket strapped under its wing will open a new chapter in space travel if it takes off from an English seaside town as planned tonight. And in keeping with Newquay's laid-back surfer lifestyle, Virgin Orbit's Launcher One rocket is going for a horizontal takeoff.
The beauty of horizontal launch or air launch means that we can use an airport. We're not having to build a launch pad in the middle of, some really remote location. This airport's really good at landing and taking off 747s, and that's what this is. It just has a really cool rocket under its wing this time.
The takeoff could happen at 10:16 GMT, but further slots have been booked in case the conditions aren't right. The plan is to release the rocket at 35,000 feet, an hour into the flight. The rocket will then blast into space on its own engines, carrying civil and military satellites, while the jumbo heads back to Newquay. Virgin Orbit says the flight is Europe's first commercial orbital launch.
In the Netherlands, around 700,000 loaves of bread are left on the shelves every day. They usually end up in cattle feed. But 3 bakers from Westervoort have found a way of recycling excess bread for human consumption, removing any potential allergens first. Sesame seeds, nuts, everything with meat, animal proteins all goes to the side, and we put the rest in piles and it goes straight into the machine. Around 20 to 30% of the old bread can be recycled. It's dried out and then finely ground. This creates sourdough again, which the bakers can then add to their new dough. The project, which receives EU subsidies, recycles 10,000 kilos of bread per year, but the goal is to move that figure up to 100,000 kilos. Consumers find the concept of using old bread for new bread quite complicated, so I think an easier way is for caterers to choose this bread and that it's finally presented to the guests in the company restaurant. They taste it and they think, how great, how delicious. The bakers say so far cafes and restaurants have been very open to the idea.